Good afternoon and welcome. We are here today to honor and to celebrate the extraordinary legacy and career of Professor of Law Emerita Joyce A. Hughes. Thank you very much for joining us, and please join me in extending a special welcome to Professor Hughes' family in attendance. Her sister Shirley Hughes and niece Roxanne Hughes will be sharing some remarks with us today. I also am very grateful to our other speakers. In addition to Professor Hughes, they include our extraordinary alumni leaders, Tony Bush, Naima Walker-Fierce, Joe Richardson, as well as President Schill, Provost Kathleen Haggerty, and Associate Dean Robin Walker-Sterling. So many members of our law school team worked together collaboratively to organize today's event. Please join me in thanking our Alumni Relations and Development, facilities, and marketing teams for their important work, and Food for Thought for providing us with the food and the drink that we will enjoy today. Today's event honors and celebrates Professor Hughes' extraordinary contributions and legacy. After earning her JD from the University of Minnesota, the first Black woman to do so, Professor Hughes became a member of the faculty there in 1971. This made her the nation's first Black female tenure-track law professor at a predominantly white institution. Before starting her career teaching law, she was awarded a clerkship with a federal district court judge in Minnesota, another first. In 1975, she joined the Northwestern Pritzker School of Law faculty and received tenure 4 years later, making her the first Black woman to do so at any school at Northwestern University, as well as at any predominantly white law school in the United States. She served on the Chicago Board of Education and was the first woman and the first African-American general counsel of the Chicago Transit Authority. During her accomplished career, she established herself as an expert in civil procedure, constitutional law, and refugees and asylum law. And after her retirement in the 2021-22 academic year, Professor Hughes became a professor of law emerita at our law school. Professor Hughes has been honored for her extraordinary contributions with the Margaret Brent Award from the American Bar Association, as an inductee in the Cook County Bar Association Hall of Fame, and as a legal luminary by the Chicago chapter of the American Constitution Society. Professor Hughes has made such a difference in our law school community, in the profession, and in society as a scholar, leader, and mentor. And it was incredibly important to me and so many members of our community that our law school and university honor Professor Hughes' extraordinary contributions and legacy. Today, as President Schill and Provost Haggerty will officially announce on behalf of the university, we are sharing the 3 different ways in which we are doing so. And I really want to especially acknowledge and thank Associate Dean Darnell Hines and Associate Dean Robin Walker-Sterling for their important leadership roles in doing so. First, the Professor Joyce A. Hughes Endowed Scholarship will provide financial aid to first-generation law students, students who will diversify their class, or those interested in pursuing academic scholarship focused on the underrepresentation of various populations. We are incredibly grateful to our amazing alumni leaders, Courtney Armstrong, Sharon Bowen, Tony Bush, Naima Walker-Fierce, and Joe Richardson for their generosity. It was my It was my honor to join together with them as the founding donors to establish this scholarship, and we would like to thank everyone who has generously given. We will hear from some of them in just a few moments. This scholarship honors Professor Hughes' legacy by supporting the next generation of scholars that will build upon her important work. We are excited that Sarah Lowell, JD Class of 2025, was selected as the inaugural recipient of the Hughes Scholarship, and for all that she will contribute. Second, with much gratitude to Provost Haggerty for her approval, today we are naming the Professor Joyce A. Hughes Corridor and unveiling a portrait of Professor Hughes that will hang there. And finally, the Northwestern University Law Review is producing a special issue this fall to honor Professor Hughes, and we're very grateful to volume 117 Editor-in-Chief Bradford McGann, volume 118 Editor-in-Chief Scott Shimizu, and the other journal editors for their leadership. We are extremely grateful to Professor Hughes for her extraordinary contributions to our law school, the profession, and our society. And so now I'd like you to turn your attention to the screen for a brief video honoring the legacy of Professor of Law Emerita Joyce Hughes.
Joyce A. Hughes was a role model and a mentor for many of us.
What she means to me is more than specific moments. She started off as a professor and then a mentor and then a friend.
We started at Northwestern about the same time, mid-1970s. So we have known each other for a very long time. We've been colleagues, been friends.
She was the first black law professor that I saw on campus. I just immediately gravitated to her, and she took me under her wing, and that's kind of how our relationship started.
She was extremely supportive of all of our efforts, and the doors were always open, and Professor Hughes' door was always open.
I was very fortunate to be at Northwestern, when Professor Hughes was there, but it was even more meaningful for me that she became a tenured professor while I was a student there.
It's amazing what Joyce Hughes has done, but it was so hard.
I am so grateful for all that Professor Hughes has contributed to our law school, to the profession, to society.
It's just amazing how she continued to just persevere through what must have been very challenging times.
It meant she was disrespected and dismissed and challenged by faculty members, by students.
I really admire her courage. I know that, as the first Black tenured law professor at a predominantly white institution, I know that she probably faced a lot of challenges and struggles.
She clearly was a super role model. There were very few Black women law students at the time. She was the only Black woman law professor at the time, so we clearly looked up to her, as a significant role model.
When I was in law school, Professor Hughes was sort of a trailblazer.
I can't list all the first. She has at least 4 or 5 first.
Everything she wanted to do was a first. Everything she wanted to do hadn't been done before.
When Professor Hughes received tenure at our law school in 1979, she became the first Black woman to be tenured in any department at Northwestern University.
It's just an extraordinary act of courage and service that she took on. It's always hard to be the first.
She's particularly important to me because of her presence.
And I think that it was really important to me to have a role model of another lawyer who was able to be successful. It did plant that seed that I can do it.
So her presence, for me personally, I think has a big reason why I was pretty confident in my career that I too could succeed.
When I think specifically of the advocacy and the scholarship and the work that Professor Hughes has done over the years, I am in awe.
To go into the office or go into the classroom and to see a professor that looks like you lets you know that we have to always be reminded of possibilities.
Just her mere existence, I think, was extremely helpful to a lot of people.
Physically walking through the law school, you don't see anyone that looks like you. And so you have these questions of do I belong? Can I do it? Am I smart enough?
She said, you deserve to be here. Don't let anyone, ever question that. I think Professor Hughes represents that spirit that we all need to have.
I owe her a huge debt because I've been able to build a career that I am hoping that my daughter sees the ripple effect.
There will be generations of people who don't know anything about her unless the movie that ought to be made about her is made about her, but they will be benefiting from the ripples of the people that she has taught and who have affected generations after them and continue to affect generations after them.
When I started law teaching, I was the first Black female tenure-track law professor in the entire country. My first job as a professor was at the University of Minnesota Law School, and I suffered the double jeopardy of being Black and female. I was dismissed often, challenged often, and treated with disrespect. A graduate of Northwestern, a Black male graduate in the 1950s, said to me once, "You can't be what you can't see." So what I think is most important about me is that students can see, women and Blacks can see, that it's possible for them to be law professors. And indeed, there are people that I've taught that are now law professors.
It is now my great pleasure to welcome to the podium Professor Robin Walker-Sterling, who's Associate Dean for Clinical Legal Education, Director of the Bloom Legal Clinic, and the Mayer Brown Robert A. Hellman Professor of Law. Before joining the Northwestern Law faculty, Professor Walker-Sterling was the Ronald V. Yagi Clinical Co-Director and Associate Professor at the University of Denver's Sturm College of Law, where she co-taught the Criminal Defense Clinic and the Immigration Law and Policy Clinic. And in the 2017-18 academic year, she served as a U.S. Fulbright Scholar at the University of Ghana. She's a graduate of Yale College and New York University School of Law, where she was a Ruth Tilden Kern Scholar, and Georgetown University Law Center, where she earned an LLM in clinical advocacy. As incredibly importantly, though, we're extremely grateful to Associate Dean Robin Walker-Sterling for her important leadership, scholarship, and advocacy work, which is making such a tremendous difference in our law school and society. So please join me in welcoming her to the podium.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. You all know that it's me because I'm wearing the exact same clothes that I was wearing in the video. I just have a different hairstyle, so you know it's me. This is my fancy suit. This is it. I'm going to say a few remarks, and then I have the distinct honor of introducing Professor Hughes' younger sister, Shirley Hughes. But before I do, I want to be sure to acknowledge Shannon Bartlett. Where are you? Shannon Bartlett, right? Who was Associate Dean for DEIE when I started, and who basically had the original idea about honoring Professor Hughes upon her retirement, and who facilitated a series of calls among the three of us when I first started. It would be Shannon, Professor Hughes, and I. And those calls were wonderful. I mean, the chance to talk to a scholar, a Black woman scholar, who just was at a point in her career where she had no F's left to give. I tell you, it was fabulous. It was fabulous. Every single call was full of wisdom and laughter and kindness and understanding. I mean, that was a real, that was important for me, and I just appreciate you so much, Shannon, for seeing that. And I think that is just part of what Professor Hughes's legacy means, right? Is that she was the first. So, and I mean, when you think about it, we can imagine what that means and how hard that is. Even if you just think about it in terms of the person who's running a race who's in front, right? They're the person who's taking on the headwind. If it's a trail race, they're clearing the path. If it's a race through the city, they're the ones making sure that the crowd first parts for, right? Like, they're taking on all that burden. And all the runners behind, you get to draft off them, right? You get to benefit from the fact that they've taken that on. And I think, and I'm sure you're going to hear this from all of the wonderful speakers that we have today, how impactful Professor Hughes's presence was and her mentorship was. But I do want to take a special moment to note her courage, because, I mean, even now, legal academia is hard for Black women and for traditionally underrepresented communities, and so I can only imagine what it must have been like for her. And so that took a lot of courage, but I'm also gonna take a moment to acknowledge her vision, right? She said herself, you can't be what you can't see, but she hadn't seen that before, right? She hadn't seen herself. That was a hope that she held in her heart that she chased and fulfilled. And I mean, you know, Lynn's right, there should be a movie. So with that said, I'm going to turn to introducing Miss Shirley Hughes, who is, as I mentioned, Professor Hughes' younger sister, and she's the third child in the curve-busting Hughes family. She has had a successful 35-year corporate career in key human resource leadership positions. And she retired early, living the dream, from the global company of Ceridian Corporation, formerly Control Data, as an officer and senior VP of human resources. Over the years, she's extended her leadership to boards focused on her 4 areas of interest: mentoring, food insecurity, health, and higher education. And she served as trustee of her alma mater, Coe College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. In 2016, she was elected to the board chair of Johnson C. Smith University, a Duke-endowed liberal arts HBCU in Charlotte, North Carolina. And she is the first woman chair, another first, of the Board of Trustees since the school's founding in 1867. Okay, I'm just gonna say those dates again, because 1867 and 2016. And then this past year, she retired after serving 18 years on the board, the past 6 as its chair. So with that, I ask you to join me in welcoming Ms. Hughes to the podium.
I'm vertically challenged, so can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you very much, Associate Dean Sterling, and our deepest thanks to esteemed Northwestern administrators, Provost Haggerty, Dean Osofsky, Associate Dean Hines Jr., and so many others who helped to plan this recognition. The presence of everyone here warms our hearts. My sister Joyce has been an educator and mentor. Her journey on the way to becoming a professor of law really began at home. Joyce's coming of age is a quintessential one of the 1940s Great Migration. Before my brother and I were born, my parents left Alabama with 2 young children and migrated north to Minnesota, seeking opportunity for a better life. Growing up, our parents encouraged us to dream big, told us we could do and be anything we wanted to be. Our edict was to respect yourself, respect others, always do your best, and speak out against race and gender discrimination and live with integrity. Education was also stressed. Joyce couldn't be described any better. Before marriage, our mother taught school in Alabama. She would return to college to meet requirements to teach after moving to Minnesota, but early on, she was a stay-at-home mom devoted to family. She prepared large home-cooked dinners where we were encouraged to discuss world and community affairs. Special Sunday dinner brought interesting guests like world boxing champion Joe Louis, who was a friend of my father's from his days in Alabama. No doubt, Joyce learned the art of conversation as I did from those family roundtables. Our father worked several modest jobs to support our family, including Airport Skycat, but his interest and talent was golf, which he had learned to be a master caddy and an associate pro at an Alabama country club. He became such a skilled golfer that he won all of the national tournaments on the United Golfers Association, which was the parallel to the white-only PGA. He decided in Minneapolis, and with the encouragement of a local group of JCs, were having a tournament, but that was also sponsored by the PGA, to enter. So rather than giving his home address, he gave a P.O. box, sent in his registration. But once they found out he was black, he was uninvited and was unable to play. Thus began his quest in 1948 to desegregate the PGA in Minnesota. And finally, in 1952, he and another black golfer teed off, and it was the first time that blacks played a PGA-sponsored tournament in the Twin Cities. His determination to fight the segregation he left Alabama made an impression on all of us. And I'm pleased to report, full circle, the Hiawatha Golf Clubhouse in Minneapolis, where he worked to integrate that facility, is now named after our father, Solomon Hughes Sr. Thank you. Breaking down barriers was the family norm. Oldest sister Toni quietly changed the face of Minnesota news broadcast as the first African American to appear on local television, reporting the weather for a local NBC affiliate in the 70s. Thank you. My brother, Solomon Jr., was part of a band that made a platinum record album, and he set many speed skating records growing up. So the blueprint was laid for Joyce's achievement, and the reason we celebrate her. My sister's journey exemplifies the adage, luck is being prepared for opportunity when it comes. Joyce distinguished herself as early as grade school when she skipped a level, a series of firsts then accumulated in high school. She was selected as a cheerleader, the first black at a predominantly white high school. In 1956, she went to Girls State, which was sponsored by the American Legion Auxiliary. Once there, she was elected governor. We thought it was the first of any state program in the country. She then went on to Girls Nation with other governors and was nominated to lead its highest office until southern states blocked her selection. Years later, When a black high school student was selected but denied a seat for the same honor, my sister reached back to advocate for her. Joyce always remembered where she came from. As a Carleton College student, where years later she served as a trustee and was conferred an honorary doctorate, she was selected to be a guest editor at national magazine Mademoiselle in New York. Although Joyce had been the magazine's representative on campus for 2 years, although they hadn't seen what she looked like, she was overlooked. And as an afterthought, when questions arose, she was installed as one of 2 guest editors. Her contributions at the magazine were so strong that she was asked to stay for the entire summer, beyond the time allotted for guest editors. As her career progressed, Joyce built strong networks. Some of those included advisor to President of Harvard, Walter J. Leonard, Clinton advisor Vernon Jordan, who also chaired the National Urban League, Kofi Annan, who went on to become Secretary of the United Nations. The other day, I came across a book, Roots, and read an inscription to my mom, thanking her for Joyce. It was from the renowned author Alex Haley, whom she'd met serving on the National Urban League board. Joyce's brilliance is also multifaceted. She learned to sew and became such an exquisite seamstress, she made her own wedding gown. And while we joked that she couldn't boil water when it came to cooking, we were so surprised that once married, she became an excellent gourmet cook. I asked her, how and where did you learn to prepare gourmet meals? She replied, well, if you can read, you can learn to do anything. Curiosity and adventurous spirit took her not only to Spain as a Fulbright scholar, but traveled to places like Benin, Africa, where she was moved to visit a slave port. She is an admirer and collector of art and brought back home on her lap in an airplane a one-of-a-kind artifact she valued, which today they would not allow one to do. It was a huge piece. Together, we've taken several trips, including the Inside Passage of Alaska, where we stood on glaciers. We also sampled French culture by going to Paris and many other trips. But she's also a contradiction who enjoys a quiet life, filled that begins by reading the New York Times and Chicago Tribune front to back every day. While Joyce's career was important to her, she gave of herself to family her entire life. Through Joyce, I've been proud to share a connection to Northwestern and to be a part of several recognitions, including 2015 at the law school's Balsa dinner, where the Joyce A. Hughes Legacy Award was initiated. I even sat in on a class or two. One class, unfortunately, my mobile went off and I was horrified. The look on my sister's face, I'll just say the look on her face. Then I had the opportunity to attend another class, and they were discussing H-1B visas. And she asked a question. Nobody raised their hand, so I raised my hand. I volunteered the answer, since I had just testified at a congressional hearing about such visas' importance to my company. It wasn't lost on me that I was never invited back to any other class. Being the first of anything is a proud but lonely road. While Joyce can't be present, it's a gift that she can receive and witness this magnificent tribute today. Joyce is not just my sister, she's my #1 hero for walking the proud and lonely road of first. I love her dearly and celebrate the doors she's helped to open a little wider for so many who no longer walk alone. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker. Roxanne Allen is the daughter of our oldest sister, Toni, whom we lost too soon to leukemia. Rox is a graduate of Drake University. She retired as Director of Technologies Communications at Fortune 500 company American Express, where she was the recipient of several marketing communications industry awards. As a member of the company's senior leadership team in Minneapolis, she worked with global counterparts in New York, Phoenix, and the United Kingdom to develop and lead strategic messaging focused on financial services technology. Rox proudly serves as a Minnesota election judge, and her interests include running, investing, and the arts. She'd like you to know she's grateful to be here today, literally and figuratively. Rox is well on her way to becoming a cancer survivor. She encourages everyone to guard their health jealously, which she credits with saving her life. I now give you my favorite niece, Rox.
Thank you. In the interest of transparency, I may be Shirley's favorite niece, but I'm also Joyce and Shirley's only niece. I have no delusions of grandeur. I echo my aunt's gratitude. My grandmother would say, "This day is gracious plenty." We appreciate the support of everyone involved, Provost Kathleen Haggerty, President Michael Schill. I can't say enough about Dean Hari Osofsky's leadership and her generosity of heart, and Associate Deans Darnell Hines and Robin Walker Sterling for all the work that they put into this celebration. To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. Initial Hughes Scholarship donors Dean Hari, Joe Richardson, Naima Walker-Fierce, Courtney Armstrong, Sharon Bowen, Tony Bush, your collective largesse sows seeds that will grow forward. Award recipient Sarah Lowell, the groundwork doesn't show till one day, but you're on your way to full bloom. Thank you to friend and former colleague Shannon Bartlett. Joyce really values all that you did. And Assistant Shona Bonds, Crystal Bridges for her tech coordination, and much more. We're grateful for the regal portrait by artist Jules Arthur and the day brightening flowers from the Black Law Student Association class of 2016. I know Joyce received them today and she's smiling. Finally, I want to acknowledge students, colleagues, and friends here today for Joyce. And while it's disappointing that Joyce's health keeps her from celebrating in person, I'm thankful for the opportunity to share my aunt with you. So I'm going to start with a few fun facts, if you don't mind. As a young girl, Joyce's idea of a pinup wasn't a heartthrob or a music group. No, she taped a picture of Constance Baker Motley on her wall. Yeah. And if you don't know who she is, she was the first Black woman to become a federal judge and to argue a case before the Supreme Court. As writer Irma Bombeck once observed, it takes courage to show your dreams to someone else. Joyce played the tuba in high school. There is actual photo evidence of Joyce wearing a marching band uniform, hoisting a tuba. Perhaps this was preparation for the heavy lifting ahead. As a teen, my slightly older social butterfly mom grudgingly took orders from her mom to bring Joyce to parties. But no matter, Joyce usually sat alone outside reading. Even now, my aunt's idea of a good party is her book clubs. We've heard that Joyce was a gourmet cook, and about cooking, Julia Child explained, "The only real stumbling block is fear of failure. You've got to have a what the hell attitude." Well, maybe that attitude had served as Joyce's recipe for her life journey. Joyce is infamous for writing memos to our family, crisp, precise, voluminous memos, memorializing everything and anything on personal letterhead. I have most of them because every precious one is part lesson, part love. To engage with inquisitive Joyce, conversation or email, is an exhilarating, exhausting, 24/7 intellectual challenge. Follow-up, additional explanation, and clarifications are required. She reminds me of the line, "I thought I was wrong, then I remembered I was a lawyer." When I was a new grad and my interest took me in a direction different than Joyce's encouragement to apply to law schools, she invited me to stay with her to interview for jobs in Chicago. One day, long before our digital world, she asked if I wanted to make some pocket change pasting newspaper clippings, and I thought, well, easy peasy, easy enough, until she dragged out a huge steamer trunk, the kind in old movies when someone travels cross-country by train with their life possessions. My family are quiet achievers, but I didn't know half of Joyce's history, stuffed feet deep in that trunk. There she was, seated next to President John F. Kennedy during an NAACP meeting of mostly men. Public service appointments by politicians to the US delegation to Belgrade, and the Helsinki Accord in Yugoslavia in the 70s. General counsel to the CTA, member of the Chicago Board of Education, and the Illinois Supreme Court's Committee on Rules of Evidence. It was a seminal moment for me when I realized that my aunt was a firebrand with humility. Sidney Poitier once noted, "It's difficult when you're carrying other people's dreams." What's remarkable is Joyce achieved her own dreams with few role models and many obstacles. She dared to do bodacious things at a time when women could hardly get credit in their name and Black people were fighting for basic civil rights. In an interview, Joyce was asked, "How do you feel about being a trailblazer?" She answered, quote, "Well, initially I thought, well, you know, I just lived my life, but someone said to me, you have to realize that usually when people think of trailblazers or pioneers, they're thinking about people who are dead for a long time. But you're still alive, so you must not only embrace it, but remember to constantly tell people so they know you're still above ground." One winter morning, late in her teaching career, Joyce walked the 2 blocks to school as she did every day and far too many weekends, now with the assistance of her rollator, and cruel winds off Lake Michigan blew her into a snowbank, where she remained until a Good Samaritan arrived. Well, when my family learned of this, we put on our pseudo-legal hats to establish state of mind. Why are you still teaching? You don't need to do this. Why not retire and enjoy life? Maybe the answer is in one last story told by my brother Brian, who attended a conference where he lives in Atlanta. A conversation was struck with a woman who mentioned she was an attorney. Chit-chat progressed to my aunt, then Northwestern, and when the woman heard Joyce's name, her eyes pooled with tears. "Professor Hughes," she gasped, staring at my brother as though he was the embodiment of my aunt. The woman was a former student on whom Joyce made an indelible impact. One good teacher can change your life, it's been said. If we're lucky, we can recall that special educator who influenced our direction, our sense of self. Teaching wasn't a job to Joyce, it was an imperative, a calling, who she is. By simply being, she hoped that underrepresented students would see open doors to walk through. But she felt an equal responsibility to every student to pass on her knowledge and love of law. The Constitution, scales of justice, Statue of Liberty, all mean something to Joyce beyond symbolism. Her mission was to prepare students inside and outside the classroom to become excellent lawyers, to undertake the weight of practicing law with virtue and compassion. In doing all of that, she brought her entirety and her authentic lived experience. To Northwestern Law, a heartfelt thank you for enabling Professor Hughes to be seen and heard, not just today, but by students and school associates for years to come. To my Aunt Joyce, you are dearly loved by our family. friends who support you, colleagues who admire and respect you, and students who remember you. And to Professor Emerita Hughes, congratulations for all you are and all you've been. You have more than passed your final exam. Thank you for listening.
Can you please join me in thanking both Shirley and Roxanne for those incredible remarks, and it means so much that you were able to be here today. Of course, we wish Professor Hughes was able to be here in person, but so wonderful to have you both here to honor her. It's now my pleasure to introduce a video from Michael Schill, who's president of Northwestern University and professor of law. He very much regrets that he could not be here in person with us today, but wanted to mark this occasion and be part of honoring Professor Hughes by sharing this video.
Hello, faculty, staff, students, alumni, and friends. I regret that I'm not able to join you in person, so I asked Dean Osofsky to share this video with you so that I could thank you for being here today to celebrate the extraordinary career of Professor Joyce Hughes. While I have not met Professor Hughes, I have long admired her work. I've admired her influence in Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, in the community, and indeed across the nation. From being the first Black woman to earn a JD from the University of Minnesota, to being the first Black woman to earn tenure at Northwestern, her journey has broken boundaries, and it has forged a path for generations to come. Professor Hughes, we thank you for your service to Northwestern and for the example you have set for all of us. Today I am thrilled to announce that a corridor in the faculty office area will be named in Professor Hughes's honor. This will serve as a reminder of Professor Hughes's legacy as a trailblazer and as a model for the rest of our faculty. What an appropriate space to bear her name. And there's more. I'm also pleased to announce the establishment of the Professor Joyce A. Hughes Endowed Scholarship. This scholarship will provide financial aid to first-generation law students, students who will add diversity to the class, or those interested in pursuing academic scholarship focused on the underrepresentation of various populations. Professor Hughes, your legacy will live on at the Northwestern Pritzker Law School for many generations to come. Thank you. Thank you for your contributions to our community, and I hope you enjoy this celebration.
It is now my great pleasure to introduce our provost, Kathleen Haggerty. Provost Haggerty assumed the role of provost on September 1st, 2020, after serving as associate provost for faculty during the 2019-20 academic year, and previously as interim dean of Kellogg, among many other leadership roles there. She joined Kellogg more than 30 years ago and holds the first Chicago professorship in finance. She's an accomplished scholar and respected faculty leader with experience in attracting and retaining top faculty in an increasingly competitive environment for academic talent. We're very fortunate to have at Northwestern a provost who is such a visionary leader, but also an extraordinary partner. I want to thank her in particular for collaborating with us to honor Professor Hughes and approving the naming of the Professor Joyce A. Hughes Corridor. Please join me in welcoming Professor Haggerty to the stage.
All right. Thank you, Hari, for that introduction. One of my favorite jobs as provost is recognizing excellence in our faculty, as we are doing today, in honoring the work and legacy of Professor Joyce Hughes. The other thing that's wonderful about these events is we often learn more about the faculty member's journey, and in this case, We learned so much about the incredibly accomplished and fascinating Hughes family. So I have, so I can understand why Joyce was such an awesome person coming from that family. So her distinguished careers is comprised of first, President Schill and Dean Osofsky mentioned many of them, so I would like to highlight Professor Hughes's work and what it means for the future. 50 years after paving the way for Black women legal scholars in the majority legal academy, Professor Hughes retires at a time when Black women legal scholars are transforming the legal academy. 27 law schools, 14% of the American Bar Association accredited law schools currently have Black women deans. When we add the associate deanships, directorships, and other leadership roles, it is clear that Black women are making critical contributions to the legal academy. This progress is only possible because of the foundation that has been laid. No one can build without acknowledging and appreciating the work that has already been done. There is no better example than Professor Hughes, whose greatest contributions will continue to pave the way for generations of Black women in the legal field. And I have to say that it isn't just Black women. As a woman in the academics, and I'm the first woman provost at Northwestern, someone like Joyce is an incredible example, and we appreciate the leadership that she's provided. Today we honor Professor Hughes and we acknowledge the incredible impact that Black women have had across the spectrum of judicial work. Thank you, Professor Hughes. Now, let me introduce our next speaker, Naima Walker-Fierce. It's an awesome last name. A founding donor of the Professor Joyce A. Hughes Endowed Scholarship. Naima is a 1996 graduate of the law school and a 1992 graduate of Northwestern University. So she's a double purple, where she earned a bachelor's degree in communications. She is currently a partner of Kogo Partners, a legal staffing firm in New York. Prior to joining Kogo, Naima was the Fierce Group, LLC, a Washington, D.C. and Nashville, Tennessee-based firm focusing on legal recruiting. Prior to that, Naima spent 10 years leading legal recruiting efforts at Weil, one of the world's most prestigious law firms, where she was a member of the firm's executive director group and was involved in a broad range of high finance, business, and law firm administrative matters. Prior to Weil, Naima practiced corporate law at Winston & Strawn and was previously the assistant general counsel at Clear Channel Entertainment. When Naima was not recruiting law school partners, she is running a well-known pub in Nashville. So welcome Naima to the stage.
Thank you, Provost Haggerty. Like Shirley Hughes, I'm somewhat vertically challenged, so give me a moment to make sure that you can hear me. I'm actually on my tiptoes, so it might take another minute. I've got to tell you all that when I was asked to speak today, I spent a long time racking my brain about what I could possibly say about Professor Hughes that no one else could say, right? And I hemmed and I hawed and I thought, well, I don't know what I could tell anyone, right? That could really articulate the extent to which Professor Hughes influenced not only my legal career and my time in law school, but so many of my colleagues. And as I was speaking with a friend by phone who was my graduating class, he started talking about Professor Hughes, and we got off the phone, and I was still trying to figure out what to say. And I then got an email from him where he, in a very touching way, reiterated what Professor Hughes meant to him. So I asked if I could read it, and he has given me his permission. So I know we're running probably 47 minutes late, but I ask your indulgence. So these are the words of Sean Carter, class of 1996. And Sean is now an employment lawyer on the West Coast. Upon arrival at the law school, I suffered from imposter syndrome and the pervasive fear that I was not good enough to walk these hallowed halls. In the late 90s, we communicated via handwritten notes left in actual physical mailboxes. When Professor Hughes learned that I was elected BALSA president, she kept my mailbox full. She recommended books and articles, invited me to office hours, and embraced BALSA initiatives. She encouraged me and by her actions affirmed me. Yes, her classroom instruction was invaluable to me, but that is not why I still, 28 years later, think of Professor Hughes with such fondness, respect, and gratitude. He continues, this beautiful woman embraced me at a time when I was a mere, uncertain, frightened, young law student. And perhaps unknowingly convinced me that I was not only good enough, I might even be better. Sean then further wrote a great deal about efforts that Professor Hughes helped him and other BALSA members with. And that was in connection with an exhaustive effort undertaken in 1995 and 1996 by BALSA to compile a list of highly qualified African-American law professors around the country whom they were hoping would be, just a few would be hired by Northwestern. It was presented to the then dean. Sadly, none of them were hired. It sort of left a sour taste in a lot of students' mouths at the time. That being said, we were all hyper aware that Professor Hughes, once we had graduated, would continue that fight and those efforts. And that sort of brings us full circle to what I was asked to speak about, which is how Professor Hughes influenced me. And I first really thought about it when I was reached out to jointly by Joe Richardson, who is going to speak after me, and Courtney Armstrong, both of whom were in law school with me. Courtney is a trustee at the Northwestern University, and they had undertaken at Teresa Cropper's request, who is somewhere here with purple hair. Where are you, Teresa? Who had undertaken it at Teresa's request to endow a scholarship. And I have to tell you, it's a confession that I'm sorry to say, Provost Haggerty, as a double Wildcat, I have never, prior to now, written a check to Northwestern, ever. Not because I didn't love my time in Evanston or my time here, but there's so many things that I found were a better use of my dollars, right? And when Courtney and Joe reached out to me, I said unequivocally, where do I send a check? And so I want to thank both of them. I want to thank Teresa and most importantly, thank Professor Hughes for her unwavering support of everyone in this room, and particularly Black students at the law school. It is those of us who were founding donors, and we hope all of y'all will join us. It is our sincere hope that the scholarship recipients not only bring brilliance to the Academy, as Professor Hughes did, but that they bring the grace and the warmth and the support that she brought to these hallowed halls. I do want to say Courtney is, I think he's watching us by Zoom. Courtney could not be here. It is his mother, Ethel Armstrong's 85th birthday. So happy birthday, Mrs. Armstrong. And I now want to introduce Joe Richardson, who said, to the extent I run over my 5 minutes, which I have done, I could simply say he's a great guy, which he is. But I will tell you all that Joe was beloved at the law school when we were here. He is now arguably has one of the best jobs in the entire world. He is practicing law on the West Coast at McCoon Law Group in Redlands, California, which is where he went to college, where he combines his skills as a litigator a social justice activist, a commentator, and just a wonderful all-around guy to try and eliminate some of the systemic inequities that people afflicted by racial disparities face, particularly people of color. And an interesting fact, in case you haven't seen him on television, Joe is frequently called upon to be interviewed on TV. And it is my daughter's hope, who is, she's very social media savvy. Once she learned about Joe, it is her hope that he replaces Judge Judy when she retires. So with that, I invite Joe Richardson up. Thank you.
I'm like, wait a minute, Judge Judy makes a lot of money now. I see some folks here that I've seen before. Our former Senator Roland Burris actually thought he'd come here and not be recognized by anyone. It's good to see you, sir. And your wife. You know, while he was in our class, he was in a class ahead of me, classmate of my big brother, Derek Brent, who is the Deputy Director at the U.S. Patent and Trade Office. And so I'm thrilled to see him. And I want to start by thanking Teresa Cropper. Listen, for those of us that came to school scared, she made all the difference. And I've known her for 30 years now. We still catch up at the Stevie Wonder concert. And she always had a great combination of encouragement and admonishment. And it showed up again about a year ago when she informed me and Courtney Armstrong, who not only is a great guy, but he is my daughter's godfather. My daughter is here with me, who is at Northwestern undergrad. She admonished / encouraged us to make sure that we did our part, so that Joyce Hughes is remembered the right way. So thank you, Teresa. I thought since Joyce Hughes was so good at evidence and she taught me evidence, I would talk about this through the lens of evidence. It's defined as an outward sign or an indication or something that furnishes proof. But showing up at the class, you really don't get evidence until you get into evidence. So I personally walked into Joyce Hughes' class as a second year. Little did I know when I came to her class how central the subject matter would be. You know, but I would learn actually, sometimes the hard way. Evidence was a how class. There was the what classes, the substantive subjects, the contracts and the torts and whatever. And then there was the how classes, the evidence. Here's how you do it. In my world, dealing with civil rights, et cetera. And I see one of my favorite professors, Lynn Rabinowitz, the difference between getting something from being morally wrong to legally wrong starts with the evidence. She believed in Socratic method. And little did I know not only how central the subject matter would be to my day-to-day life, but how incredible she was as a person. So the subject of evidence I show up with every day, whether I'm trying to prove a case in court or whether I'm talking about somebody else's case on court TV. When I talk about the outward signs or the indications definition of evidence, those outward signs were with Joyce Hughes all along in terms of who she was. So many firsts, we all know about that. The evidence showed that Joyce Hughes is a great professor with a servant mentality. I didn't understand how historic she was, how historic her journey had already been by the time I'd met her. Historic and difficult and groundbreaking and arduous. Martin Luther King said, "The greatest among you will be your servant." And Joyce Hughes brought a humility and a servant's mentality. I love the word humility when it was said. She knew what she was talking about, but she wasn't high-handed. She'd say what she needed to say when she needed to say it. And I'm sure people that taught with her knew that. But most of the time, she was doing her job, encouraging those that would be encouraged. There's a comfort from seeing someone that looks like you in a room full or a law school full of folks that may not so much look like you, or professors that may not so much look like you. And it was good for them too, even those that saw people that looked like them. In her own way, she reminds us that Black excellence, women's excellence, as she embodies it, should not be considered by anybody to be exception and not the rule, should not be considered more miraculous than indicative. We should look at her like she looked at us and say, there's more like her to be found. That's why this scholarship and this honor is so important, because there are others. Evidence to show the work of a trailblazer like Joyce Hughes is hard. We're all with her now today, you know, everybody's smiling. Everything's everything, right? But she hasn't felt necessarily always so supported and celebrated and understood, even though she was desperately needed. As to testimony, I've talked to many at definition of evidence, but one would be my own aunt, Dr. Josie Johnson, who was the first Black person appointed to the University of Minnesota Board of Regents and was there when Joyce Hughes got there. And I called her and I asked her, she's 90 years old. I said, tell me something about Joyce Hughes. She said many things, but she recognized Professor Hughes as an incredible intellectual scholar when she first saw her, and a quality educator. And she also added, she was a significant intellectual presence for young African-American hopefuls in Minnesota. And sometimes people like her don't get recognized for the quiet academic excellence which they exemplify. Professor Hughes, like so many that have tread into spaces where an absence of those like her suggested she didn't belong, showed that she did, one difficult step at a time. The progress she sought moved slow. Perhaps the fact that every step was so hard creates enough of a footprint in the path of progress to point the way. She longed for and longs for, more than anything, others to be able to follow in her footsteps. So at the end of the day, when we want to win a case, it's all about the evidence, right? Not just what we profess or think or feel, but the evidence ought to point us in a direction. So let's make sure the evidence has to show not only that what Professor Hughes represents is important, but that representation is important. Neither of them can be a relic of the past, something to be flirted with but not committed to, something to be sought and imagined but never satisfactorily attained. Thank you, Professor Hughes, for showing us through your work, your commitment, and your heart that it's all about the evidence. I'd like to introduce the spectacular Tony Bush, 1981 graduate of the law school, and 1978 graduate of Wellesley College. She recently retired after serving nearly 10 years as executive vice president and global head of government affairs at News Corp. Prior to joining News Corp, she spent 20 years at Skadden Arps, where she rose to become partner in charge of the communications group. Prior to that, Tony served as senior counsel to the communications subcommittee of the U.S. Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, which has oversight for the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. From 1981 until she joined the U.S. Senate committee staff, she practiced communications law in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Bush.
All right, I'm in the short group. So hopefully I've got this link steady. So first of all, I'm mad at somebody, but I don't quite know who, for making me have to follow Joe. Those were really wonderful remarks, and also making me at the very end, because all of the remarks have been so wonderful from the family, from other law students, from the faculty and the school. It's really an honor to be here today. Let's start with a few facts. I have a few facts that nobody else has said today. For those of you who don't know, a number of years ago, the History Makers did an interview with Professor Hughes, and they always start that interview by asking a few questions. And so her favorite color is yellow. Her favorite food is salmon. And her favorite time of year is the fall when classes start. I also thought it was interesting that she had a sister named Tony, and that she was a cheerleader in high school and in college. I'm not going to go through and repeat what everybody else has covered so well, but I do want to emphasize one of the things that Joyce brought to the law school and that impacted me was not just her academic achievements, but her community involvement, her involvement in the Urban League, at the CTA, and the Board of Education, because she brought that into the classroom. And that served as an important milestone for me and something to look at, which is not just enough to be a lawyer, that you have to do other things to support your community. And she was a role model for me in doing philanthropy and doing other kinds of work. She also worked in corporate America. Importantly, I also want to mention her time in Minnesota, because it wasn't an easy time. And she talks about that in her History Makers interview, and I commend everybody to read that, to listen to it. It was an unprecedented challenge that when she went through and survived. And the university apologized to her for how they had treated her. But it also says a great deal about Northwestern, that after that experience in Minnesota, Northwestern brought her on and made her a tenured professor. And that was due in large part to then Dean James Rawl, for whom she was forever grateful for that experience. Others have talked about the fact that she was a role model, that she was a superb teacher. She had the ability to inspire her students. She really brought the law home to us and made it real. I was at the law school, as I said in my interview, when she was named a tenured professor. And that was a huge milestone. I mean, I can't describe how exciting it was for all of the students, not just the Black students, that we were all proud to be at the first school to have an African-American dean. I mean, an African-American tenured professor. You know, it was touching to us. It was inspiring to us. You know, it is an honor for me to be here today, to be one of the founding donors to the Joyce A. Hughes Endowed Scholarship. I want to thank all of the other donors who have spoken and who couldn't be here today. And I want to thank the school, and a special mention to Darnell, Robin, and Teresa for really making this happen, for being behind the scenes. I envision the scholarship as further increasing the diversity of the student body and enriching the experiences of all students at Northwestern. Thank you.
So I want to thank all of these incredible speakers, but also invite the Professor Hughes family and all of our speakers back up to the stage to unveil a portrait of Professor Hughes, which we are thrilled to have hang in the newly named Professor Joyce A. Hughes corridor.
Yep. Family ought to be up there.
Yeah, you all need to be safe.
Oh, now, don't be shy.
Pull it. Yeah. Okay.
And if you direct your attention up to the screen momentarily, I think we're going to see what the corridor looks like. Oh, nice.
Wow.
And I really encourage everyone to go visit the corridor itself. But now we're all going to go back down because we're going to turn our attention to the screen behind us to have an opportunity to hear directly from Professor Hughes in her own words at this ceremony.
My appreciation to everyone here. I'm so sorry I'm unable to greet you in person. How I wish my health permitted me to attend. There's much I miss about Chicago and Northwestern Pritzker Law School. My deepest gratitude to Dean Harry Osofsky for spearheading the celebration. I appreciate the Provost Kathleen Haggerty and Northwestern President Michael Schill are participating on this occasion. Thanks to Associate Dean of Alumni Relations, Darnell Hines, who worked to make this occasion a reality. I want to acknowledge Kristen Bridges and her team for assisting my virtual appearance. Special thanks to my former students Joe Richardson and Northwestern trustee Courtney Armstrong, who proposed this recognition and who, with alumni donors Sharon Bowen, Tony Bush, Naima Walker-Pierce, and Dean Harry Osofsky, led initial funding for the scholarship named for me. My congratulations to first scholarship recipient, Sarah Lowell. I expect she will carry well its spirit and legacy. I extend my thanks to former faculty assistant Shonen Bonds and everyone who is sharing this honor today with me. I also want to recognize the work of artist Jules Arthur, who so beautifully painted my portrait that will hang in the school's atrium. Finally, I want to mention the love and support of my family. Deceased parents, Solomon Hughes Sr. and Bessie Hughes. Deceased older sister, Tony Hughes. And existing siblings, Shirley Hughes and Solomon Hughes Jr., as well as niece and nephew, Roxanne Allen and Brian Allen. The significance of my career is exemplified by the phrase, "You can't be what you can't see." Indeed, an imagination gap existed with the inability to picture a black female where none had been before. Thus, as both a law student and law professor, I experienced the double jeopardy of being both black and female. One of 4 women to graduate from law school at the University of Minnesota in 1965, and the only black, my experience was very different than today. At the time, law students, including the few black students across the country, were overwhelmingly male. Illustrative is my torts class as a first-year student. I sat in a large lecture hall in the last row on the aisle. Upon starting the class, the professor addressed me asking, to the person sitting in the last row, right out, "Do you belong here?" I emphatically said I do. Then he asked me to state the first case. I had no idea what that meant, having just arrived in the U.S. from my year in Spain as a Fulbright scholar. Later, I learned what that meant. During another experience as a law student, the banquet for the law review in which I served was held at a private club that did not allow black or Jewish members and required women to use the back door. A fellow journal member was female and Jewish and refused to go. I announced, "I am going and I will walk through the front door," and I did. Throughout my life, I was determined to both open and walk through doors despite the obstacles. Along the way, I wrote about my experiences within a book about Black women attorneys in a chapter entitled Neither a Whisper Nor a Shout. The title comes from an author who said Black folk either tend to whisper or shout. I neither whisper nor shout. Looking back, I am pleased much has changed since I was the first Black woman to receive the JD from the University of Minnesota. It was Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, not his life, that influenced law schools to seek Black students. When the students arrived, they questioned, where are the Black professors? And so law schools started recruiting. I decided to leave law practice to become the first Black female tenure-track professor in any majority law school in the country. Law students at the University of Minnesota queried why not a male instead of a female, but they were unable to convince a Harvard professor to leave Harvard for Minnesota. After teaching at the University of Minnesota, I joined Northwestern as a visiting professor. I remained at Northwestern to become the first Black woman to be tenured in 1979 in any department of the university. Perhaps my calling and longevity as a professor can best be summoned by the perspectives and comments of former students and lawyers of all backgrounds, a few of which I've selected to share. I could go on and on about the many things I loved and found helpful about your class, but what was most impactful was being taught by a Black law professor. Your classroom was one of the first places where I did not feel out of place at law school. Before you, there was just the question of mere survival. When you came along, there was a question of excellence. As students, we are deeply influenced by the subtle ways that you, as professors, direct the conversation and influence our methods of analysis. What an impact you've had on my understanding of the law, both doctrinally and as a social institution. I am thrilled that several former Black students have become law professors, and several Black women lawyers and judges, some of whom I never met, have credited my existence with influencing their legal careers. I am grateful Northwestern Pritzker Law School provided a place for me. The significance of being a first is to keep the door open for others to follow. My presence has shown that if you can see it, you can be it.
Thank you, Professor Hughes. Thank you for all that you've contributed to our law school, to society, and for the doors that you opened and also that you hold open for others to follow. It's made such an extraordinary difference, and I am so grateful for everybody who's joined us here today to honor Professor Hughes. But most importantly, I know we are all incredibly grateful to Professor Hughes and want to collectively say thank you. I want to thank everybody who participated in today's program to honor Professor Hughes, and also invite everybody to continue the celebration and honoring of Professor Hughes with us at the reception that follows this program. Thank you very much.